So the Digital 2 first assignment can be found under assignment sheets, which is found under the course modules in the Canvas page. And if you look up and download the cast sheet assignment, it just describes it in words. It has 3 components, one of which you've already completed as an exercise, which is to create basic shapes. Now assignment 1 is refining your outline drawing. And the way we're going to refine it is that its final form should be a vector. And it should emphasize the silhouette, the overall outside shape, as opposed to emphasizing details within or shading. And then once we have that, and I'm going to make sure that you have a nice clean vector outline of your design, then we're able to go into Photoshop if you like, a raster program, or you could even color it with an Illustrator, but we'll do coloring behind that outline. And then if you want to, and you can use any type of coloring you want, flat color, duotone, full spectrum. You could even add color holds, you can add special effects, as long as you have a solid outline to begin with. So we can always refer back to our assignment sheets, these one-page documents for everything you need to know, but they're not very inspiring. So for this, I also have a handout just to remind you of some important things. This is just a very generic skeletal template for human figures, and then some ideas for different animal characters that you might mix, because you're required to have 3 original characters in your cast sheet. So when you start drawing it, you've already done your basic shapes, and I've seen some of them and given credit for them, and they're nice and unique. We want to make sure before we go too far into our refined class line that we're using a high enough resolution. So I'm going to create a new file within Photoshop that is around 9 by 12 inches. In fact, I think this is my default that I set up. No, where's my default? The 9 by 12 default. So here it's a width of 9 inches, a height of 12 inches at 350. I'm going to go ahead and make that 600, really high resolution. And I'm going to change it from being 9 by 12 to being more like 14 inches wide by 9 inches, just in case. All right, I have my rulers turned on, which you can do with Command R, and that allows me to use the Move tool to move guidelines down. So I'm going to have my baseline here. You can see that's what it's in blue. And then I want my average character, kind of average human character, let's say, to be about there. And my largest character I might want up here, and my little kid character or my animal character or whatever I haven't thought of what I'll do, I'll put about there. And now when I sketch, I don't want to do it on my background layer. So I'm going to move above, and if I'm really paranoid, I'll double click on the background layer, change it to layer 0, and then lock it and relabel it a blank white layer. So I can't accidentally color on it. And now layer 1, this will be my basic shapes. And so however you are creating them, this is a nice way to organize them after the fact for future use. I'm going to use a regular brush. I'm going to use a blue line color, just because that's traditional for character design and animation. I'm going to use a brush tip that is pressure sensitive to size, but I'm going to take the opacity down to about 60 or 70. And I'm going to start with a size that's fairly large, around 70 pixels. So that if I push hard, it looks like that. If I'm really light, it looks nice and thin. Now notice it's following my guides. I don't want it to do that. So I need to go to View, and then Snap, and then unclick Snap, so that I can draw right through my guides without it following them. Okay. Might even take this opacity down a little bit. So here's my normal human character. I first start with a cranium shape. My big old character, his cranium is going to be about the same size. And then my little kid character, cranium about the same size, or animal character. And now I add the mandible, the jaw, whatever it is. I'm going to go a little nutty with these designs just for fun. So the cranium is just in the skull, so you can build up from there. So I'm going to build this big jaw, these sunglasses, this crazy hairdo. Now I'll use a gestural curve for the spine, which will give a lot more movement, even though this is mostly about just getting proportions. And before I go too much further, I want to know where the feet fall. And that will help me in the design. So my guide for the ground should actually be about there, the middle of the foot. And we're sketchy and loose because we make little mistakes, like I hyperextended that knee a little bit. And in basic shapes, you don't need to worry about erasing. It's all about just building it up. Now, once I get a sense of the character's height and where their pelvis is, this character's pelvis is dead center. So he could be either a comedic character or an action character, but his elbows will line up with the bottom of his rib cage. He's built for some flexibility here, but his legs are never going to look that graceful because they're not longer than the top half of his body. Okay, this, let's see, I might save that for later. The big guy, let's make this a boxing comic. I'm going to give a huge mandible, but notice that the cranium is still the same size. His eye line is going to be here. Slightly different shape in the silhouette. And his collarbone, instead of being underneath his chin like that, is going to be back behind his jaw to show that he has really slumped over posture. And he's going to be much wider at the shoulders, giving his rib cage a much broader shape. And I want him to be more comedic. So I'm going to move his pelvis below center. So this is his pelvis here, really wide, and he's going to have these really short, stocky legs. And he'll still look very human. He'll be in kind of a boxing stance, as long as his elbows line up with the bottom of his rib cage. So his gloves are are bigger than his cranium. And that kind of shows what this character is all about. You can use foreshortening as long as your elbows are in the right place. So I can have this arm coming towards us and foreshortened, but make sure you have at least the upper arm showing how it lines up with the rib cage. All right, there's the front of the rib cage turning this way. The front of his rib cage. And I'll often do the little hollow out of the front of the rib cage so you can see how long the waist is. So let's just tidy these up a bit. Yeah, that looks sillier to have the long waist and the low pelvis. Okay, now who's going to be the more comedic character or the more sympathetic character? Because neither of these people look very likable. So I am going to make it, let's see, a raccoon. A raccoon's overdone. A badger. We'll do a badger. And I'll usually design animals from the side. So there's the cranium, there's the muzzle, there's the ear. And this badger is going to be the boxing manager. So its spine very curved. Its collarbone is lower down. Its elbow should still line up at the bottom of its rib cage, but his rib cage is very small. And then he's going to be wearing pants. That's funny. He's going to have a little hairy belly showing. But what's difficult about a badger and four-legged animals is that their legs are different than human legs. They basically walk on their toes. So instead of just drawing that structure for the leg, I have to draw a really short femur and then a long foot, like that. Now I design it from the side so I can see how it all works. And now once I have that, I can turn it a little bit, turn his collarbone a little bit, and he's going to be smoking a big cigar. And then, what do badgers' tails look like? I think they're short, something like that. I'll have to look up some badger reference. Okay, so those are my basic shapes. At this stage, I can work with them. They're all on one layer. But what's nice is I can take that badger and I can move him a little bit and I can actually transform him. So these are things worth playing with before you solidify your final. Now he looks more like a weasel. I can play with their proportions, especially with the warp tool. Get it to where I want. As long as that cranium stays about the same size amongst all your characters, they'll relate well to each other. And as long as the elbows line up with the bottom of a perceived rib cage. The pants thing, they're looking more like a skirt, so I'm going to change them to shorts. It's going to have like a business vest and shorts. It'll look like a little peeper boy or something. Maybe I'll give him a hat. A street urchin hat. All right. So these are my basic shapes. I can lock those if I'm happy with them. Now I get to the refined line. And I'll usually do this in black, like it's black ink. Put a lot of pressure on myself. I'll use a similar brush, but I'll zoom in. And now I know where I want everything. I might make this brush a little bit smaller. And I'm going to make the opacity 100%. And I'm going to make my color black. I thought I had done that. 100% flows 100%. My brush is right. My size is right. So now it should give me a nice clean ink line. I try not to be too self-conscious. The advantage of inking digitally is that, of course, you can alter it. But I'm not trying to be too heavy on detail. Try to get kind of the shapes I want. Figure out his exact haircut, his hairline. All those decisions will affect how the character is seen from multiple angles. I'm not doing shading here, but I can do a little bit of effects like in the glasses to kind of show the texture. And once you have the basic shapes, it's easy to kind of fill in the other things. Let's see. Forgetting who this guy is. So he's a boxer, so he should be shirtless. And so on. I'm just going to draw this one character up so I can show you how to vectorize it and finish outlines. Whoop. Don't use the pencil tool, use the brush tool. Okay, musculature. You want to make sure everything feels like it connects. So he's going to be a skinny little guy, but I want a lot of overlapping lines to show how the muscles would connect. Same thing you would do with fabric. Especially in the shoulder area. And don't draw a lot of lines for something that you can draw with just one line. Like his forearms and his biceps. I'm trying to make him look pretty weak here. I don't need lots and lots of little muscle details like that to show it. Just a slight overlap at the elbow. And don't worry if your lines get a little wonky and shaky. That's just the nature of it when you're drawing by hand like this.